There are various plays throughout the manga that in the real world would be considered illegal. Such is the case of Wakashimasu and the Tachibanas using the goalpost to boost themselves, or that time where Genso uses his hat to save a shot that was changed in the 2023 anime and Road 2002. There are also some plays that will be considered offside, like that time where Tsubasa lets Hyuga hit him with the Ryu shot in front of Spadas, making some sort of pass to Hyuga, and we don't see any defenders nearby to enable Tsubasa. Or there is the classic play of Diaz scoring against Genso with his hand, and even according to a Japanese referee, the Skylab Hurricane would be considered a foul because it could count as an aggression from one player to another. This is a theory that explains that the reason that the Captain Tsubasa manga from World Youth onwards doesn't release to the West is because FIFA decided to ban its commercialization outside of Japan because of the brands and clubs that appear without their respective permission. Some even theorize that this could also be the reason that the Captain Tsubasa animes don't advance in the story that much, although this will make sense since various video games that contain said story and characters have been released to the West, though with different names. This theory is backed up by the fact that the publishers that released the World Youth manga in France and Italy and even Shueisha had various complications that led to the prohibition of the manga outside of Japan. Well, maybe it's not exactly prohibited, as for example the Argentinian publisher of the original manga, Ibrea, said that Shueisha wanted to avoid this kind of problem regarding the trademarks that was supposedly imposed by FIFA when World Youth released in Italy and France. If this is actually true, it will be sorta hypocritical from FIFA, because they prohibit the manga but then later exhibit in their museum and do interviews or documentaries about the manga. But coming from one of the most corrupt organizations in the world, it is no surprise. Although it is a little strange that the original manga is supposedly fine, even though it also utilizes certain clubs and associations without their permission. So this topic is kind of a headache to understand. This is basically a theory that says that Takahashi recycled or even stole some of the story elements from the games and movies. This theory is backed up by the fact that a lot of things that happen in the movies and games are very similar to things that happen later on in the manga, and since we don't know how much influence did Takahashi have in these pieces of media, some will argue that he stole them. An example of this is the filler of the 1983 anime with Pierre and Schneider. Later the movie and games have Carlos Santana, where, in the game, he appears to play a final with Brazil, and in the movie, a South American selection, both led by Roberto. Even in the games there is a player that appears in the middle of the match. In the game is Arthur Coimbra, while in the manga is Natureza. In the games we see things like Hyuga playing for Juventus, Matsuyama playing in England, Tsubasa playing in a second-tier team. In the games it's Lecce, while in the manga is Barcelona B. Some even suggest a parallel between the player from the Tecmo games Michael with Mikael, not only in the name, but also the religious insinuation, where Michael, for example, has the Holy Cross shot, and Mikael it's self-explanatory. This is a theory that says that the next Dream arc is not canon, which, for those who don't know, is a supposed continuation of the manga in the form of a graphic novel included in the video game Captain Tsubasa Dream Team, in which they narrate the Champions League arc. This is due to many factors. One of them is the fact that the information about the canonicity of this arc was kinda vague to begin with. It's because of this that some people say it's not canon. Nowadays this theory gains more credibility by the fact that in current interviews of Takahashi, he explicitly says that he wants to do his own version of the Champions League, or that Next Dream is the base for the Champions League arc he wants to draw. Because of this, one will think that the Next Dream we know is a beta version of said arc, which in other words, it will mean that Next Dream is not exactly canon. This, in turn, generated various conspiracies such as a theory that says that Takahashi gave a non-canon story to Kill Up, that said company will advertise it as such, or that maybe, due to regret, Takahashi let Killab do some changes in the story, and that will be the reason why there's some inconsistencies in the story or things that doesn't sound like Takahashi wrote it. As you can already tell, this is the fact that Yuichi Takahashi was once married to the original voice actress of Tsubasa Osora, Akeri Hibino, or also known as Yoko Ogai. We don't know details of their private life, but apparently they divorced around 2014. This theory is very self-explanatory. It's basically a theory that says that apparently Tsubasa will be playing in the J-League after playing for Sao Paulo, but Takahashi decided to put him on an European club that ended up being Barcelona. Some even claim that there was a novel, which is supposedly lost to media, where Tsubasa appears playing in the J-League, but the information on this is pretty scarce. There exists a very curious doujin that makes sense the Captain Tsubasa franchise with Dragon Ball. For those who don't know, a doujin is a manga created by fans of a specific manga. This doujin is called Captain Goku, and it narrates the same story of Captain Tsubasa but with Dragon Ball characters, where for example Goku is Tsubasa, everybody in Toho are Namekians except for Gohan who replaces Sawada, then Shinhan is Wakabayashi, Trunks is Misaki, Vegeta is Nita, Android 17 is Misugi, Yamcha is Matsuyama, everybody in Hirado are Frieza soldiers, where Ginyu is Jito, etc. A rather curious crossover. I'll put in the comments a video briefly explaining it. It's very common that Captain Tsubasa had collaborations with things football or sport related, such as clubs, leagues, sporting drinks, football video games, etc. But there exist some weird collaborations. For example, this image of Tsubasa with Optimus Prime from the Transformers franchise, drawn by Yoichi Takahashi. But one of the most curious ones is a video game in association with Japan Racing Association for some kind of game where Tsubasa and company ride some horses. This game has some bizarre cinematics such as the Tachibana doing a Skylab Hurricane to a horse and such. This is more than a theory, it's a fact, because Takahashi is a big fan of sports in general, so he includes players with characteristics from other sports or disciplines. There are various examples like Kenzo learning boxing, Punaka and his Muay Thai, the Thailand brothers with the Sepak Takraw, the Mexicans with their Lucha Libre football, Furukawa and Kasami with their futsal, and possibly the most emblematic of all, Wakashimasu and Nita with their Wakado Ryu style karate. That, as a fact, the Wakado Ryu, not to be confused with Wado Ryu, is a discipline exclusive to the manga. That means it doesn't exist in real life. This is a theory that explains that each member of the Real Japan 7 or Real Japan 11 is said to replace a member of All Japan, including some that didn't get cut, maybe because the members of Real Japan 11 got cut to 7. These are Yomikura, ignoring the fact that he says to be a replacement of Tsubasa, he will fit as Misaki's replacement, Ino will replace Hyuga, Sakaki will replace Jito, Okano will replace Nita, and Sugimoto will replace Soda. But there's a problem, and that is that for example the Tachibana twins don't get a replacement, and we don't know which member will Urabe replace. So taking into account that the original team was of 11 players and not 7, then this will be the futsal combi replace the Tachibanas, Urabe could replace Ishizaki, Igawa, since he's an all-rounder player, could replace Misugi, who also has been seen change positions, Soga will replace Matsuyama, and last, Yamada could be the replacement of Wakashimasu, but since Ken left the All Japan team, they decided not to count him. Do you remember the fiasco of NFTs? For those who don't know, NFT is an acronym for non-fungible token, and it's a type of digital property that throughout a blockchain, it determines that an object is unique and irreplaceable. There exists an official Captain Tsubasa game developed by a Killab subsidiary that utilizes NFT mechanics, but we are not gonna talk about that today. Well, there once existed a company that did sell Captain Tsubasa NFTs illegally. Why illegal? Well, an external company sold these guys the supposed rights of the manga to license these NFTs, but that company that sold them said rights actually didn't have them. So they basically scammed them, and shortly after, the actual company that holds the rights of Captain Tsubasa sued them. So they decided to cancel all about this project. This is basically a curiosity of the 1983 anime. In this anime, as I already mentioned in a previous video, there exists a filler in which Tsubasa met Sanae and some guys of Nankatsu before it actually occurred on the manga. Since they didn't know Sanae's name yet, they decided to call her Miyuki Namiki in the credits. The Captain Tsubasa animes are known to have a really good soundtrack, but there's a slight problem. That is, that not all of these songs were released to the public, with maybe the exception of Road 2002. The 1983 anime has some missing here and there. In Shin they only released 4 songs, in J they only released 6 songs to the public, and in the 2018 anime they directly didn't release any of them. A lot of people, using audio software, try to take the scenes in which there appears to be an unreleased track and throughout effects, remove the voices and sound effects directly from the series, leaving only the music, but the quality of these are not perfect. There's a case I want to mention, and that there's a YouTuber called Son Unleashed who not only does the already mentioned, but he also reconstructs the melody with his own instruments, staying as loyal as possible to the source material, which is really good in my opinion and the quality is incredible. During the course of the manga throughout the Shonen Jump magazine, it was common that some pages were in color. The problem is that when the manga released in physical format, these pages were printed out with the typical grayscale. During the period of Road 2002 to El La Liga, Takahashi stopped doing many color pages when the manga was in the Young Jump magazine, but in Rising Sun, due to the change of magazine to Grand Jump, we could finally see some new color pages made by Takahashi. There exist some images scanned directly from the Shonen Jump magazine that are in color, but there aren't many. Here are some comparisons. There are some characters that share the same name. For example, in Italy Junior Youth, there's a character named Gentile, and then in World Youth we see Salvatore Gentile, which is a different character. The same goes for a keeper named Galtoni in the Argentina Junior Youth, that later in Rising Sun will be replaced by another character also named Galtoni that is over 23 years old and plays in the Argentinian League. There are also various Japanese players that share names, such as the case of Aoi and Takasui who both share the name Shingo. Have you ever noticed that since the end of World Youth onwards, Tsubasa never does his skydive or skywind shot? We don't know why, but in the case of the skydive shot, a lot of people will consider it a foul. Because of this, maybe Takahashi decided to never use this shot ever again. But the case of the skywind shot is more curious, mainly because it is never mentioned again beyond the World Youth manga. In fact, in Rising Sun, where we see techniques similar to the skywind shot, like the Galvan Cannon, Tiger Brand's Ryu shot, the Tornado Arrow Ryu shot of Mikael, or even the Full Metal Phantom, they always mention Hyuga's Ryu shot, but never the Skywind shot, which is kinda similar. The All Japan team of Captain Tsubasa has a lot of players from various regions of Japan, like Tokyo, Hokkaido, Saitama, Kyushu, Osaka, Shizuoka, etc. We receive various players like Mitsui, Matsuyama, Hyuga, Shito, Soda, and Genso respectively. The thing is that in Captain Tsubasa there's a lot of representation from a lot of places in Japan, but one of the players who we don't know who exactly where he's from is, surprisingly, Isaki, that, due to moving out constantly because of his father's work, we don't know exactly in what part of Japan he was born. This generated various theories to explain his natural prefecture. The most well known is that he's from Yokohama, maybe because in the manga Boku wa Misaki Taro, we see that his mother resides there, so people think that there is his place of origin. There exist various hacks or modifications of various Captain Tsubasa video games, such as the old ones from Tecmo or even the more recent ones from Bandai Namco. The great majority of these mods are translations, as a lot of these games never left Japan, but there are some hacks that try to change the story, animations, characters of the game from the ones to the manga, like the amazing Captain Tsubasa 2 hacks. In recent times, there are also people that modified the game of Captain Tsubasa Rise of New Champions, which, for example, they add characters from the manga that are not in the game, like the mod Captain Tsubasa World Cup Showdown, or even a mod adding characters from other football series like Blue Lock. A really cool job if you ask me. We have seen cases like the death of Hyuga's father, that in the ES arc we know that it was 1 year prior, but in World Youth they mentioned that it was 3 years prior. The thing is that there are some timeline inconsistencies in certain details. For example, in Rising Sun we see characters with intelligent phones and tablets, which, in the time that the manga is supposed to be transcurring, which will be the 90s, this didn't exist, although some will argue that the technology in Captain Tsubasa is more advanced than in the real life at that period. Also in the 2018 anime they decide to modernize everything, which later on will bring up some issues. Like in the Junior Youth arc, in the match against France, Mikami does 3 changes in total, saying that he couldn't do more, but at the time that the anime was released, player changes were changed from 3 to 5. Also in the same anime we see that Soda gets expelled for having 2 yellows, which by modern rules would mean that he couldn't play the final. But they kinda fixed this by saying that they protested the yellow and decided to remove it. Also another thing is that in the animated World Youth there's a slight problem with Germany, since when the original manga was written, Germany was split in West and East Germany, but later in World Youth we are shown that Germany is reunified. Because of this, there will be new members and Germany will be stronger. This in the anime could be a little bit weird. This is basically a theory that the infamous Danish duo of Haas and Christensen, for their behavior with the flight attendees just when they arrived to Japan, could be involved in controversies for being possible sex offenders, which for a manga like Captain Tsubasa will be tremendous. It is no surprise that according to some people, certain characters have a lot of potential to be more interesting or a better player in the story. For many these characters are Santana, Pascal, Yumikura, the Futsal Combi, the Tachibanas, Soda, etc. But one of the cases that resonates the most is Misugi, who, according to many people, would actually be the best player of Japan if not for his heart disease. But there's also another one that I would like to bring up, and that is Nita. The ability of Nita to not only run fast, but also his quick learning, makes him a character with a lot of potential. An example of this is in the Tecmo games, where he gains more protagonism, or rather antagonism, since he decides to betray Japan and join the Campione team that we face in the final. Have you ever noticed that in the video games of Captain Tsubasa Tsukuro Dream Team and the Takae Dream Team, both developed by Killab, they never release units from Australia or Greece? Which is weird because in some trailers and cutscenes from the game, we see these characters appear, although they don't give them much screen time. This generates some kind of conspiracy that, at least for the Australians, Killab won't consider them for beating Japan in the World Net 23 arc, which will be really petty if I'm being honest. As for the Greeks, we don't know exactly why they didn't get the units. In recent interviews from Takahashi, he mentions in various occasions that the ending of the middle school arc could have been different. Well, the ending would have been Nankatsu beating Toho, but since he felt a little bad about Hyuga, he decided to end it as a tie, which, at least as I investigated, this tie thing is not a practice that actually happens in the Japanese school tournaments, but is rather something original from the manga. Also, I investigated something at last minute, and that is the fact that originally, the ES arc, Roberto would have actually taken Tsubasa to Brazil, but was changed because of the popularity of characters like Hyuga and others. Tsubasa Plus was an augmented reality mobile game similar to Pokemon Go, launched in the year 2020, and cancelled not too short after because of the coronavirus pandemic of the same year. It is unknown how exactly this game was played due to the short time of operation, which is a real shame because it seemed to be really ambitious, but given the global circumstances it went unnoticed. In Japan, it is very common that a manga or anime has some sort of official theatrical adaptation. Captain Tsubasa is no exception, having an adaptation called Super Experienced Stage Captain Tsubasa that had a total of 23 functions from August 18th to September 3rd of 2017. The synopsis is the following. After Japan got crowned as the champion of the Junior World Tournament, years later a special sub-20 club was formed called the Red Storm, in which they include various international players, some well-known like Schneider, Müller or Pierre, and some new ones like Abeleon or Noel Polo. And they are coached by Roberto Hongo and they face a sub-20 Japan. At the end of the show the score is 3-4 in favor of Japan. We know about many works that were inspired by Captain Tsubasa, like Inazuma 11 or Shaolin Soccer, but there are some whose plot and drawing style are very similar to Captain Tsubasa. An example of this is a series of Gambare Kickers, which plot is that a kid that moves into a new town joins a pretty bad football team, but with him the team gets better and they face the Red Devils, who have a genius goalkeeper that seems unbeatable. Basically, at least in the beginning, it is very similar to Captain Tsubasa, not only in the plot, but also in the style. Even so, this series evolves more than that, and has a more comic and slice-of-life appeal than Captain Tsubasa. Another example will be Moero Top Striker, whose plot goes that there's a kid that's considered a prodigy and decides to go to Italy to play football, where he meets an ex-player from the English selection, who decides to train him and inscribes him to a bad team so that he could make it better. As you can tell, there's a lot of similarities, but at the same time this series decides to have something more original with a plot more centered about romance. In summary, it is very impressive the cultural impact of Captain Tsubasa, so that there could be works inspired by it. In the movie of Captain Tsubasa Ayaoshi Sen Nippon Jr., we see Hyuga training in some snowy place to develop a new shot. The thing is that later in the movie, when Hyuga enters the field in the second half, he decides to use his new shot called the Eagle Shot, which has the same name as Matsuyama's shot, but in reality the effect is different, as this one has a vertical spin, like Tsubasa's drive shot, which makes it real curious. It is worth noting out that Matsuyama's Eagle Shot was named in the Junior Youth arc in the manga, which was released after the movie, so it is possible that Takahashi was inspired by the name of this shot to name Matsu's Eagle Shot. The video game of Captain Tsubasa for the Famicom was the only Tecmo game that left Japan, although in a different way. Well, due to the fact that, at least in the United States, the Captain Tsubasa franchise practically didn't really exist, so they decided to change the graphics, names and story to completely new ones that could be more attractive to American public. This game was called Tecmo Cup. The story is as follows. Robin Phil, who replaces Tsubasa as a protagonist, tries to become a better player than his father. As you can tell, they changed the names of the players. For example, Hyuga is Damon Stark, Misaki is Cecil Phil, which will be Robin Phil's brother, Kenzo is Lucas Wilder, etc. Obviously, they also changed the names of all of the teams from the middle school arc for one of their own. And curiously, they also changed the countries in the junior youth phase. For example, England becomes Japan, Poland becomes Argentina, Argentina becomes Arabia, France becomes Germany, and Germany becomes Brazil, to give some examples. Also, they had some changes in the music, as the original version had licensed teams like Moete Hiro for Nankatsu and Japan, that were replaced by the following. Unfortunately, due to low sale of this game in the West, this story was not continued, although for the Sega Genesis there existed a prototype also called Tecmo Cup, which is very similar to the Captain Tsubasa 3 video game for the Super Famicom. But this game was apparently cancelled, maybe due to the fact that Sega was entering a crisis and decided to cancel a lot of those games that they had planned. Since yet again I took a lot of time to upload the video, here are some extras. This is a theory that says that Arthur Coimbra, the Brazilian football player that appears in the Tecmo games, was planned to appear in the Captain Tsubasa Tsukuru Dream Team game. This is backed up by some images that prove this theory, but since this game was closed down in 2017 and was exclusively on a Japanese website, we don't know if this exactly was real or not, although many claim that the image is clearly edited. I didn't put this in the iceberg because I don't know how true this is, since I don't know Japanese, but well. This is basically the fact that supposedly the number 283 can be pronounced very similar to the word Tsubasa, where 2 is 2, 8 is Ba, and 3 is San, which spelling it will be similar to the word Tsubasa. This is why in various events the Tsubasa Day is celebrated the 28th of March, which will be 28 of 3. This is a hilarious Spanish parody fansub for the Shin Captain Tsubasa anime made by the YouTuber Chisazo in 2011, in which they utilize a lot of idioms, insults, and typical Argentinian phrases with the scenes of the series. If you want to watch them, I will leave them in the comments, although it is in Spanish. There are two things that are in the files of some Captain Tsubasa Tecmo games. One of these is an image of Roberto that seems to be of a profile of a playable character, which will mean that this character was planned to be playable, maybe as a flashback where we see him play for Sao Paulo. And the other is an unknown song that's in Captain Tsubasa 4 that you can listen now. Captain Tsubasa 30 Shunen Kinen, The Best Soccer Songs Gekito Samurai Blue, is a recoupilatory commemorative album with songs that are football related, launched in the year 2010 that has Captain Tsubasa thematic. There's really nothing to talk about and I can't put the songs because of copyright, but if you wish to listen I can leave you a link to the Captain Tsubasa wiki that has all of the songs from the album. The Tsubasa Cup is a sub-12 cup celebrated annually on Katsushika, Tokyo since 2017, where they invite various sub-20 clubs and football schools to dispute a tournament with a Captain Tsubasa thematic. This cup has participation of even the Japanese subsidiaries of various clubs from Europe and South America, for example Barcelona, Inter Milan, and even Boca Juniors, as they have exhibition matches where the various Japanese players participate in a match between Nakatsu and Meiwa. The winners of this tournament do not receive a monetary prize, but rather an acknowledgement for participating in this cup, which is merely for exhibition.